Hey there, welcome to Lurkbound. I'm so glad you're here. There's something about the quiet parts of the world, the places people don't usually look, that holds the most chilling secrets. Tonight, I've put together a collection of true accounts that prove sometimes the things we fear aren't just in our heads. They're out there, waiting in the silence. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel, so definitely let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you're a fan of these kinds of stories, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what I do here. Now, make sure your doors are locked, settle in, and let's see what's lurking in the dark. I remember that day very clearly, even though at the time it started like the most normal, boring day possible. I was alone in my bedroom, just sitting there playing games, completely relaxed. It was one of those moments where your mind is empty, your body is calm, and the outside world feels far away. I lived alone, so silence was normal for me. The house had its usual background sounds, like the hum of electricity and distant noise from outside, but nothing that ever made me feel uneasy. I felt safe, comfortable, and fully distracted by the game on my screen. Then, out of nowhere, the security alarm started ringing. At first, my brain didn't fully register what was happening. It took a second for the sound to cut through my focus. When it did, my heart jumped so hard, it felt like it hit my throat. The alarm was loud, sharp, and impossible to ignore. I froze for a moment, controller still in my hands, listening to it scream through the house. My first thought was that it had gone off by mistake. Maybe a sensor glitch, maybe something technical. That kind of thing happens, right? I tried to stay calm, even though my chest felt tight. I stood up slowly and stepped out of my bedroom. The hallway looked normal. The lights were the same. The air felt the same, and nothing looked disturbed. Still, that alarm was screaming, and every step I took made my body feel heavier. I told myself I had to check the house. I couldn't just ignore it. I started moving from room to room, quickly but carefully. I checked the bathroom first, then another bedroom, then the storage areas. Every door I opened made my stomach twist. I half expected to see someone standing there, but each room was empty. The silence between the alarm sounds felt thick and uncomfortable. I kept listening for breathing, footsteps, anything at all. There was nothing. Once I finished checking the inside of the house and didn't see anyone, I went back to the alarm panel and turned it off. The moment it stopped, the house felt too quiet. That silence felt worse than the alarm itself. I stood there for a second, trying to calm my breathing, telling myself everything was fine. That's when I noticed the front door. It was wide open. I stared at it, confused, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The door wasn't just unlocked. It was fully open, like someone had walked right through it and left it that way. Cold air from outside was coming in, and it made my skin crawl. My mind immediately went back to earlier that day. I clearly remembered locking that door. I wasn't unsure. I wasn't guessing. I knew I had locked it. I always did. I was careful about things like that. As if that wasn't bad enough, I noticed something else. One of the electric fence sections outside was missing. Not broken. Missing. That realization hit me hard. This wasn't an accident. Someone had been here. My heart started racing again, even faster than before. My hands felt shaky, and my mouth went dry. I slowly walked to the door and locked it, double-checking it like my life depended on it. The sound of the lock clicking felt weak and small compared to the fear growing inside me. I decided to check the house again, but this time everything felt different. Before, I was just being cautious. Now, I was terrified. Every shadow felt suspicious. Every sound, even the smallest one, almost made me jump. The house suddenly felt way bigger, and way more dangerous than it ever had before. I moved slowly, trying to stay quiet, even though I knew if someone was inside, they already knew I was there. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears. I checked the rooms again, one by one. I looked behind doors, inside closets, under tables. I kept expecting to come face to face with someone, and the thought made my stomach twist with fear. When I finished checking and still didn't see anyone, I tried to convince myself that whoever had come in was already gone. Maybe they panicked when the alarm went off. Maybe they ran away. That idea gave me a small sense of relief, but it didn't last long. I started thinking about what they might have taken. That thought scared me almost as much as the idea of someone being inside the house. If they had time to move around, what did they touch? What did they see? Were they still hiding somewhere? I started looking around for valuables, checking places where things could have been stolen. My eyes kept darting around, never staying in one place for too long. I walked into the living room, trying to stay calm, telling myself to just take a quick look and then leave. The living room felt open and exposed. I didn't like being there. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a stage with nowhere to hide. That's when I heard a noise coming from the kitchen. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Something moved. My whole body went cold. My heart started pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I slowly turned my head toward the kitchen, every muscle tense, and my mind screaming at me to run and also freezing me in place at the same time. And then I saw him. A person dressed completely in black, moving fast toward the kitchen window. For a split second, everything felt unreal, like my brain couldn't fully accept what my eyes were seeing. He didn't look at me. He didn't say anything. He just moved with purpose, like he knew exactly where he was going. Before I could react, before I could even scream, he was gone. He climbed out through the window and disappeared. I stood there in shock, staring at the empty kitchen. My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any second. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists just to keep control. The fear hit me all at once, crashing down like a wave. He had been inside the house the whole time. That realization was terrifying. While I was checking rooms, while I was trying to calm myself, he was hiding somewhere, listening, watching, waiting for the right moment to escape. The thought of that made my skin crawl. I felt violated in a way that's hard to describe. This was my home, my safe place, and someone had been hiding inside it without me knowing. I rushed to check every corner again, even though I knew he was probably gone. I checked closets, behind furniture, inside rooms I had already checked twice. I didn't find anyone. The house was empty again, but it didn't feel safe anymore. I couldn't stop thinking about how close it all was, how easily things could have gone differently. What if I had walked into the kitchen sooner? What if I had surprised him? What if he hadn't run? Those questions kept spinning in my head, making my chest feel tight and heavy. I felt angry, scared, and helpless all at the same time. I hated the idea that someone could just walk into my life like that, leave their fear behind, and disappear. After everything settled, the house felt strange, familiar, but wrong. Every sound made me tense. I kept checking the doors and windows over and over again, even though I knew they were locked. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise pulled me back into that moment, seeing that dark figure moving toward the window. Even now, thinking about it still makes my heart race. It wasn't just scary in the moment. It changed how I felt in my own home. The sense of safety I had before never fully came back. Once you realize someone can be that close, hiding in your space, it stays with you. That was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, not because of what happened, but because of what almost happened. It was Halloween night, and I was just hanging out in the kitchen trying to enjoy myself. I had Harry Potter playing in the background, the kind of movie you put on when you want something familiar and comforting. The house felt normal, safe. I wasn't doing anything unusual, just standing there, half watching the screen, half lost in my own thoughts. It was supposed to be a quiet night. No parties, no plans, nothing wild. Just another evening at home. Then the kitchen door opened. At first, my brain didn't register danger. It didn't even register surprise. A guy walked in through the kitchen door, and for a split second I honestly thought it was someone I knew, or maybe some kind of Halloween joke. It was Halloween after all. People do stupid stuff on Halloween. That was the logic my mind grabbed onto, because the alternative was too terrifying to process all at once. Then I saw the gun. Everything shifted in that instant. The air felt different, heavier, like the room shrank around us. The guy was holding the gun and moving toward me fast. He grabbed me by the front of my shirt and started yelling at me to get on the ground. His voice was sharp and aggressive, but my brain still refused to fully accept what was happening. I actually tried to talk to him. I remember saying something stupid, something casual like, "Hey man, what's this all about?" I cringe when I think about it now, but at the time it felt like the only thing I could do. Part of me genuinely thought it might be some kind of prank that had gone way too far. Another part of me thought that if I just kept things calm, if I acted normal, maybe it would de-escalate. It didn't. He was struggling to force me down, trying to control me while keeping the gun in his hand. Everything started happening too fast and too slow at the same time. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I could hear my own breathing, loud and uneven, like it didn't belong to me anymore. Then a second guy came running in. I didn't even have time to fully turn my head before he kicked me in the face. The impact was shocking. Pain exploded across my face and head, and I stumbled and fell. Any remaining hope that this was some kind of joke disappeared instantly. This was real. This was happening. I was not in control anymore. The first guy grabbed a blanket from somewhere and threw it over the back of my head. The fabric pressed against my face and blocked out my vision. That moment was when I truly thought I was going to die. Not in a dramatic movie-like way, but in a quiet, heavy, final way. The kind where you realize this could actually be the end, right here on your kitchen floor. They forced me down, telling me to stay still and be quiet. I tried. I really did. I laid there on the floor, my face pressed into the ground, my body shaking uncontrollably. But I couldn't stop myself from begging. I was crying, my words tumbling over each other, telling them, please, please don't hurt me, please don't kill me. I don't even remember exactly what I said, just the feeling of desperation pouring out of me. While I was on the ground, they ran through the house. I could hear them moving fast, opening drawers, grabbing things, shouting to each other. They weren't there for me. I slowly started to understand that. They were there for my roommate, for his stuff, his electronics, his weed, his money. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was collateral damage. That realization didn't make it better. If anything, it made it worse. It meant they didn't care about me at all. I wasn't even important enough to be the target. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes, they left. I heard the front door open and slam, footsteps fading away. The house went silent again, except for the sound of my own breathing and the blood rushing in my ears. I stayed on the ground. I didn't move right away. I couldn't. My body felt heavy, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I was scared that if I moved, they would come back. I was scared that if I made a sound, something else terrible would happen. I just laid there, trying to convince myself it was over. One of the strangest thoughts I had in that moment was about my roommate's cat. I realized they had left the front door open, and my brain fixated on the idea that the cat might get out. It sounds ridiculous, but trauma does that. It latches onto small, familiar worries when the big ones are too overwhelming to handle. It took me a good 10 to 15 minutes to finally get myself off the floor. Every movement felt slow and deliberate, like I was moving through water. My body hurt, my face throbbed, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I made my way to the kitchen door, closed it, and locked it. The sound of the lock clicking into place made me break down all over again. I sat down and collapsed. I couldn't breathe properly. My chest felt tight, like there was a heavy weight pressing down on it. I started sobbing, deep, uncontrollable sobs that came from somewhere I didn't even know existed. I wanted to call someone, anyone. I needed to hear a human voice that wasn't threatening or cruel. Then I remembered my phone. They had stolen it. That realization hit me almost as hard as everything else. I felt completely cut off, trapped in the house where it had all happened, with no way to reach out for help. The fear came rushing back in waves. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to get out. I had to find a phone. The idea of going outside terrified me. They had just been there. What if they were still nearby? What if they were watching the house? But staying inside felt just as impossible. Every room felt contaminated by what had happened, so I forced myself to move. Getting to my car was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It was pitch black outside. Every shadow looked like a person. Every sound made me flinch. My body was still shaking as I got into my car and locked the doors. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to slow my breathing. That's when I saw police lights coming down the street. At first, I panicked. I didn't know why. I think my brain was just overloaded. Then, relief started to creep in, mixed with fear. I watched the lights move, and when they went out of view behind some trees, I got out of my car and went to sit on the front steps of the house. I waited. I didn't know what else to do. I just sat there, numb and exhausted, waiting for someone to come and tell me I was safe. Eventually, the police arrived. A neighbor had heard the commotion and called it in. I don't remember everything I said to them. I remember answering questions, nodding, shaking my head, feeling like I was watching myself from outside my body. Even now, talking about it is hard. When I think about that night, my chest tightens. My heart races. I feel that same weight pressing down on me, like I can't get enough air. Sometimes I just want to curl up into a ball and disappear. The fear doesn't feel like it belongs to the past. It feels present, like it's still sitting somewhere inside me, waiting to be triggered. That night changed me. It taught me how fast normal can turn into nightmare, how quickly safety can be ripped away, how the body remembers things even when the mind tries to move on. I survived, and I know that matters. But survival doesn't mean it didn't leave a mark. It did, and it still does. I grew up in a very quiet rural area, the kind of place where silence feels heavy at night and darkness seems to stretch forever. Our house sat alone, surrounded by open land and trees, and the nearest neighbor lived about half a mile away. As a kid, I never really thought much about how isolated it was. It was just home. During the day it felt peaceful and safe, but at night the same openness could feel unsettling, especially when there were no street lights and no sounds, except the wind or distant animals. On this particular night, I was already older, old enough to drive and stay out late. It was winter, and I had been at a concert with friends. I came home much later than usual, well after my parents had gone to sleep. The cold was sharp that night, the kind that bites at your face the moment you step out of the car. I drove a diesel vehicle back then, and because of the freezing temperatures, I always had to plug it in when I got home, so it would start properly in the morning. It was a routine I had done countless times before, even late at night, so I didn't think anything of it. I parked the car in the driveway, shut off the engine, and stepped out into the cold. The air was still almost unnaturally quiet. No porch light was on, which was unusual for my parents, but I assumed they had just forgotten. The house loomed behind me, dark and silent, every window black. I walked to the front of the car, bent down slightly, and reached for the cord to plug it in. That's when I felt it. That strange sensation you get when you realize you're not alone, even before you consciously see or hear anything. I paused and looked up. About 30 feet away from me, who's standing in the yard, was a person. For a second, my brain struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. It didn't fit with what I expected. No one should have been there. We lived too far from the road, too far from other houses, and it was far too late for visitors. But there he was, completely still, watching me. He was tall, taller than anyone in my family, and he wore a dark peacoat, the kind that hangs heavy and straight, giving his body a solid, imposing shape. From what I could tell in the low light, his hair was wild and curly, reaching down to his shoulders. It looked messy, almost untamed, and it moved slightly when the wind passed through. In his hand, he held a cigarette. I could see the faint orange glow when he took a drag, the light briefly illuminating his hand and part of his coat. But no matter how closely I looked, I couldn't see his face. The light was wrong. There was only a single distant light somewhere behind him, maybe from a farm building or a far-off road, and it cast him entirely in shadow. All I could see was his silhouette, sharp and dark against the dim background. I knew, without any doubt, that he wasn't supposed to be there. My brother was out of town that night, and my parents were definitely inside, asleep. They had gone to bed hours earlier, and no one else had any reason to be on our property. The realization hit me all at once, and my body reacted before my mind could catch up. I froze. I stood there, half crouched near the front of my car, staring at this stranger in my yard. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. The cold didn't matter anymore. The only thing that existed in that moment was the distance between us and the fact that he was watching me. We stared at each other for what felt like a very long time, though it was probably only a few seconds. He didn't speak. He didn't move closer. He didn't gesture or acknowledge me in any obvious way. He just stood there, cigarette in hand, completely calm, like he had all the time in the world. My mind raced through possibilities. Was he lost? Was he someone from the concert somehow? Was he a thief, or worse? None of those explanations made sense. You don't casually stand in someone's yard in the middle of the night, smoking and watching them, unless you're there for a reason. I considered running, but my legs felt heavy, like they didn't belong to me anymore. I considered yelling, but my throat felt tight, and I was afraid of breaking the strange, fragile stillness of the moment. Everything felt balanced on a knife's edge. Then, without warning, he broke eye contact. He turned slowly, almost casually, and began walking away, heading north across the yard. His movements were unhurried, confident. He didn't look back. He didn't run. He just walked, disappearing gradually into the darkness as if he had never been there at all. The moment he vanished from sight, the spell broke. Adrenaline flooded my body all at once. I straightened up and rushed toward the house, my boots crunching loudly against the frozen ground. Every shadow felt threatening, every sound made me flinch. I reached the door, unlocked it with shaking hands, and slipped inside, locking it behind me as fast as I could. Inside, the house felt different than it usually did at night. The darkness felt heavier, more oppressive. I moved quickly through the living room and down the hallway to my parents' bedroom. I knocked on the door, harder than I meant to, and called out to my dad. He woke up immediately, confused and groggy, but the urgency in my voice must have cut through his sleep. I told him there was someone outside, standing in the yard, watching me. As I spoke, the reality of it all hit me again, and my voice shook, despite my efforts to stay calm. My dad didn't hesitate. He got up, grabbed a flashlight, and told me to stay close. We went back outside together, the cold rushing in again as the door opened. The yard looked completely different now. With the flashlight cutting through the darkness and another light turned on, it looked empty, peaceful, normal, too normal. We walked around the area where I had seen the man standing. There were no footprints that we could clearly see, no signs of someone having been there. We checked near the trees, the edges of the property, and even walked a little ways in the direction he had gone. There was nothing. No movement, no sound, no evidence at all. After a while, my dad told me it was probably someone passing through, or maybe my eyes had played tricks on me in the dark. He tried to reassure me, but I could tell he was unsettled too. You don't just ignore something like that, especially when you live so far from everyone else. Eventually, we went back inside. My dad stayed up for a bit, checking doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. I went to my room, but sleep didn't come easily. Every small noise made my heart jump, and I kept replaying the image in my mind. The tall figure, the cigarette glow, the way he stood there watching me like I was the strange one. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was a lost traveler. Maybe someone had cut across our property and stopped to rest. But none of those explanations ever fully satisfied me. The calm way he stood there, the fact that he didn't say a word, and how he simply walked away when he chose to still haunt me. Years later, I still think about that night. I've never seen that man again, and no one in my family ever reported anything else strange around that time. But the memory has stayed with me, clear and vivid, like a photograph burned into my mind. Living in the country teaches you that isolation can be both comforting and terrifying. That night taught me how thin the line really is between feeling safe and realizing just how alone you truly are. Even now, whenever I step outside late at night and see nothing but darkness stretching out around me, I can't help but remember that silhouette in the yard, standing quietly, watching, before disappearing into the night. It happened in the middle of the night while I was asleep. I wasn't technically alone because my roommate was there too, but the situation still felt deeply isolating and terrifying in a way I've never quite been able to forget. At the time, we were living in a house that belonged to my third roommate's uncle. That roommate wasn't staying with us then, but his uncle had bought the place, renovated it, and rented it out to us. The house sat in a strange in-between space. It wasn't completely remote, but it wasn't close enough to feel safe either. We were a couple of miles away from a fairly populated city, yet surrounded by farmland that stretched on in every direction. The property itself was about 3 acres, and nearly a third of that land was thick forest. Those woods didn't stop at our property line either. They just kept going, dark and quiet, disappearing into the distance. During the day, the place felt peaceful, quiet in a calming way. At night, though, the silence felt heavier. There were no streetlights nearby, no neighbors close enough to see their porch lights. Just the house, the land, and the woods. That night, I went to bed like any other. Nothing felt off when I fell asleep. No strange noises, no uneasy feeling. Just exhaustion pulling me under. I don't know exactly what woke me up. It wasn't a loud noise at first, it was subtle, the kind of thing your brain catches before you're fully awake. I opened my eyes and lay there, listening, trying to figure out why my body had snapped me out of sleep. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. They were outside, near my window. At first I didn't panic. My room faced part of the yard, and we lived near farmland. Animals wandered around all the time. Deer, coyotes, raccoons. It wasn't unusual to hear movement outside at night. I slowly sat up and looked toward the window, squinting into the darkness, trying to make out anything unusual. I couldn't see anything. The night outside was pitch black. No movement, no shapes, nothing that clearly said person. I told myself it was probably an animal passing through. My heart rate slowed a little as I lay back down and pulled the blanket closer, trying to fall asleep again. That's when everything changed. The next sound wasn't subtle at all. It was unmistakable, the sharp, mechanical click-clack of a shotgun being pumped. There is no confusing that sound with anything else once you've heard it. It's heavy, deliberate, and final. The kind of sound that instantly floods your body with adrenaline before your brain even has time to react. Before I could even process it, I heard running on our porch, fast, heavy footsteps. Then my roommate yelled from somewhere in the house, his voice full of rage and panic. "Fucking asshole!" A second later, there was a gunshot. The sound was deafening. It echoed across the land, louder than I ever imagined a single shot could be. The blast ripped through the quiet night, bouncing off the trees, rolling out into the open fields. I didn't think. I reacted. My heart slammed against my ribs as I jumped out of bed and grabbed my shotgun. My hands were shaking, but my body felt strangely focused, like everything else had faded away. Fear and instinct took over completely. I moved fast, heading toward the door that led out to the balcony. My mind was racing with possibilities. Someone was outside. Someone had been on our porch. Someone had pumped a shotgun right outside my window. Every worst-case scenario flashed through my head at once. When I stepped outside onto the balcony, the night air hit me like ice. The darkness felt deeper out there, thicker. I raised my eyes and saw my roommate standing a few feet away, shotgun in his hands, staring out into the woods. He was alone. No one else was visible, no movement, just the trees swaying slightly in the distance. We stood there for a moment without speaking, both of us scanning the darkness, listening for any sound. My ears were ringing from the gunshot. My pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Finally, I asked him what the hell just happened. He explained that he had heard footsteps too, not just near a window, but on the porch itself. Someone had been walking around, testing doors, trying to find a way in. When he realized it wasn't an animal, he grabbed his shotgun and confronted the situation the only way he knew how. He told me he heard the person move quickly, panicked, like they knew they'd been noticed. That's when he racked the shotgun. The sound alone probably scared the intruder, but when the person didn't immediately run, my roommate fired a warning shot into the air. That was enough. Whoever it was bolted off the porch and disappeared into the woods, swallowed by the darkness beyond our property. Hearing the explanation didn't erase the fear, but it gave it shape. Knowing what had happened made it less chaotic in my head. There really had been someone there. Not a ghost, not my imagination, not an animal. A real person had been trying to break into our house. We stayed outside for a bit longer, watching the tree line, listening for branches snapping or footsteps retreating. But there was nothing. The woods went silent again, as if nothing had ever disturbed them. Eventually, we went back inside and locked every door and window. I remember checking the locks over and over, even though I knew they were secure. My hands still wouldn't stop shaking. Once the adrenaline started to fade, the reality of what could have happened sank in. We were isolated. If that person had gotten inside, help wouldn't have come quickly. The nearest neighbors were far enough away that they wouldn't have heard anything unless they were already awake and listening. I asked my roommate if we should call the cops. He hesitated. He didn't think it was necessary. The person was gone. No one was hurt. There was no proof left behind, no clear direction the intruder had gone. He worried it would turn into a long, pointless ordeal. I wasn't sure what the right answer was. Part of me wanted someone official to know what had happened. Part of me just wanted the night to end without dragging it out any further. In the end, we didn't call. Instead, we stayed up. Neither of us even pretended we could sleep after that. The house felt different now, like its walls had thinned. Every creak, every small noise made us tense. We turned on lights, kept our guns nearby, and put on Game of Thrones, just to have something familiar and distracting playing in the background. The show ran episode after episode while the night slowly passed. We talked a little, mostly about what we'd heard, what we thought the person was doing, and how long they might have been watching the house before we noticed. As the hours went by and the sky outside started to lighten just slightly, the fear eased into exhaustion. Nothing else happened. No more footsteps, no sounds from the porch, no movement in the woods. By morning, the world looked normal again. Sunlight hit the fields. Birds made noise. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. But the feeling lingered. Even now, when I think back on it, what stands out isn't just how scared I was in that moment. It's the strange mix of terror and relief. Terror at the idea that someone had been so close, quietly trying to enter our home in the dead of night. Relief that my roommate was alert, armed, and willing to act without hesitation. Out of context, the whole thing sounds absolutely horrifying. Waking up to footsteps, hearing a shotgun being pumped, a gunshot in the night. But once I understood what was happening, once I realized the threat had been stopped, there was a strange sense of safety that followed. That night changed the way I think about being not alone. You can share a house with someone and still feel completely vulnerable. And sometimes the thing that saves you isn't comfort or calm, but awareness and quick action. We never saw the person again. We never found footprints or signs in the woods. Whoever it was disappeared into the night and stayed there. But I've never forgotten the sound of that shotgun, the way fear snapped me awake, or the silence that followed once the danger was gone. Being home alone late at night has always been hard for me. My parents are very social people, and they go to birthday parties and gatherings all the time. They also tend to come back really late, sometimes much later than they should. I remember one Sunday when they didn't come home until around 11:30 at night, even though my little brothers had school the next morning. Moments like that always make me feel upset and uneasy. I hate being alone at night, and when they're gone for hours I start to feel paranoid. I don't truly relax until I hear them come back home and know I'm not alone anymore. On this particular night, my parents and my brothers went to a birthday party for one of my brother's friends. I stayed home by myself. I tried to make the evening comfortable so I wouldn't think too much about being alone. But I was sitting on the couch with a big bag of chips, some drinks, and my dog curled up next to me. I had my phone connected to the TV, watching anime and YouTube videos. I kept telling myself everything was fine, that I had done this before, and that nothing bad was going to happen. Around 8 in the evening, I noticed a car pulling into the driveway. At first, I didn't panic. I assumed it was just one of the neighbors. Our driveway is right next to theirs, and cars often slow down or pull in by mistake before parking next door. I watched the car carefully because it didn't look familiar to me. I expected it to turn and park in the neighbor's driveway any second, but it didn't. Instead, the car pulled fully into our driveway and stopped. The moment I realized that, my heart dropped. I felt a rush of fear hit me all at once. I stared at the screen, barely breathing, trying to understand what I was seeing. I told myself to calm down. I thought maybe the neighbors had friends over too, since they were having a party that night as well. Maybe someone just parked in the wrong driveway by accident. I tried really hard to believe that explanation, even though my body was already tense and my stomach felt tight. A few minutes passed. I was still sitting on the couch, but I couldn't focus on what I was watching anymore. My thoughts were racing. Every possible scary idea was running through my head. Then, suddenly, I heard a loud knock on the window. It wasn't a gentle tap. It was loud and firm, the kind of knock that makes your whole body jump. I froze. The knocking continued for a few seconds and then stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy and terrifying, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt like I couldn't move. At that moment, my fear completely took over. Two horrible possibilities filled my mind. The first was that someone was trying to break into the house. I imagined people wanting to hurt me, hurt my dog, hurt the other pets, and rob us. I pictured strangers forcing their way inside, and the thought made me feel sick. The second possibility felt just as terrifying. I started thinking about child abductors. I had heard male voices outside, and my mind went to the worst place imaginable. I was scared they might be trying to trick me into coming outside by pretending to be someone I knew. I was shaking. I felt like crying and screaming at the same time. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go near the windows again. And I didn't want to open the door no matter what. I felt trapped inside my own house. In tears, I called my dad. My voice was shaking so badly that it was hard to explain what was happening. I told him about the car, the knocking, and the voices. I begged him to come home and check on me. Thankfully, he took me seriously and came over to the house. When he arrived, he checked the area around the house. He didn't recognize the car either. We even asked the neighbors if it belonged to them, but they said it wasn't theirs. That made me feel even more unsettled. My dad tried to calm me down. He told me that if anything else happened, I should go straight to the neighbors for help. After making sure I was okay, he went back to the party. Even though things seemed quiet again, I couldn't relax. I went back to the couch, but I was completely on edge. Every small noise made me jump. I kept glancing at the windows and listening carefully for any sound outside. The house felt different now, like it wasn't as safe as it used to be. About 2 hours later, I heard male voices again. My heart started racing all over again. This time, instead of freezing, I slowly walked toward the window and carefully peeked outside. My hands were trembling as I looked. That's when I finally saw what was going on. The car belonged to the older brother of my younger brother's friend. They had parked in our driveway so they could go to the park nearby to shoot fireworks. Seeing that explained a lot, and I finally felt some relief. I thought the mystery was solved, and I told myself I could calm down now. But then my brother said something that confused me again. He told me that they never knocked on the window. That thought immediately brought the fear back. If they didn't knock, then who did? I felt my chest tighten again, and my mind started spinning. I tried to distract myself, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I decided to text a friend about something I was freaking out over in the newest episode of Sword Art Online. Talking to him helped take my mind off things a little. We joked around, and he told me not to spoil the episode for him. Then everything suddenly made sense. It turned out that the knocking on the window was actually him. My friend, who is now my boyfriend, had been there with his co-workers from Domino's. They were delivering pizzas next door and saw me inside, so they decided to knock on the window to say hi. When I realized that, I felt a mix of emotions all at once. I was angry at him for scaring me so badly, but I was also incredibly relieved. The fear that had been sitting in my chest for hours finally started to fade. It wasn't criminals. It wasn't abductors. It wasn't someone trying to hurt me. It was just people I knew. I told him how badly it had scared me, and he apologized once he understood how serious it felt from my side. Even though I was upset, I couldn't deny how relieved I was. The danger I had imagined wasn't real, and I was safe. In the end, everything turned out fine, but that night stayed with me. Being home alone like that, with my imagination running wild, was terrifying. For a 15-year-old, it felt overwhelming and intense. Even now, when I think back on it, I remember how real that fear felt in the moment. It did have a happy ending, but that doesn't change how scary it was while it was happening. When I was younger, power outages were a normal part of life in my neighborhood. This was back in the 1990s, and the electrical system wasn't very reliable, especially during storms or on really hot days. Blackouts would happen without warning, sometimes lasting minutes, sometimes hours. Back then, we didn't have phones with flashlights or backup power banks. When the lights went out, the house instantly turned into a maze of shadows. Whenever it happened, my parents would light candles and hand them to us so we could move around without bumping into furniture or walls. The soft glow of candlelight would flicker across the rooms, making everything look unfamiliar. Corners seemed deeper, ceilings felt higher, and even familiar hallways felt strange and quiet. As a kid, I was used to it, but I also found it unsettling in a way I couldn't fully explain. On this particular night, the power had gone out again. I don't remember there being a storm or anything dramatic, just that sudden click when everything shut off at once. The television died mid-sentence, the hum of appliances vanished, and the house fell into an unnatural silence. My parents lit candles like they always did, placing some on tables and handing one to me so I could see where I was going. At some point, I decided to take a shower. Looking back, that might seem strange during a blackout, but warm water was still running, and I wanted to feel clean and relaxed before going to bed. I took my candle with me into the bathroom and placed it safely on the counter, far enough from the water. The bathroom looked completely different in the dim light. The mirror reflected shadows instead of faces, and the tiles on the walls seemed darker than usual. The shower itself felt normal at first. The sound of water was loud in the quiet house, almost echoing. I washed my hair and body quickly, not wanting to stay in there too long. Something about being alone in the bathroom during a blackout made me uneasy, though I couldn't say why. It was just a feeling in my stomach, a kind of nervous excitement mixed with fear. After I finished, I turned off the water and grabbed my towel. As I dried myself, I stood in front of the mirror, the candle's flame dancing beside me. My reflection looked strange in the flickering light. My face would appear and disappear as the flame moved, shadows sliding across my features. That's when a thought crossed my mind. I remembered the story of Bloody Mary. I had heard about it at school from other kids. Everyone had their own version of the legend, but the main idea was always the same. If you stood in front of a mirror and said her name, she would appear. Some kids said you had to say it 3 times, others said more. Some claimed she would just scare you, while others said she could hurt you. I had always been curious but too scared to try it for real. Standing there in the bathroom, alone, surrounded by darkness and candlelight, the idea felt tempting in a stupid, childish way. I didn't actually want to see anything. I just wanted to feel brave, to prove to myself that it was all nonsense. I didn't say her name out loud. I didn't even whisper it. I just thought it. The moment the thought fully formed in my head, I heard a sharp sound, like a sudden hiss. It was quick and clear, right next to me. Before I could even react, the candle flame went out. Instantly, the bathroom was plunged into complete darkness. There was no soft glow anymore, no shadows dancing on the walls, just pure black. I couldn't see my hands in front of my face. The silence felt louder than the sound of the shower had been. My heart slammed against my chest, and my breath caught in my throat. For a split second, I was frozen in place. My mind raced, trying to explain what had just happened. Candles can go out, I knew that. Maybe a draft from the hallway. Maybe I moved too quickly and blew it out without realizing. But the timing was too perfect, too immediate. I had barely finished the thought before the sound. and the darkness followed. Fear took over. I dropped the towel, didn't bother picking it up, and ran out of the bathroom as fast as I could. I didn't care that the house was dark or that I might trip. I just wanted to get away from that mirror, that room, that feeling. My feet slapped against the floor as I raced down the hallway, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I screamed for my parents as I ran down the stairs, my voice high and panicked. I barely remember what words came out of my mouth, only that I was yelling and crying at the same time. When I reached the living room, I nearly collided with my dad, who had already stood up, alarmed by the noise. My parents grabbed me, asking what happened, trying to calm me down. I clung to them, shaking, unable to stop crying. Between sobs, I tried to explain. I told them about the candle, the sound, the darkness. I didn't mention Bloody Mary at first because I felt embarrassed and stupid, like I had somehow caused it by thinking something I wasn't supposed to. They brought me to the couch and wrapped me in a blanket. My mom lit another candle and handed it to my dad, who went to check the bathroom. I sat there, heart still racing, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Every creak of the house made me jump. When my dad came back, he said everything looked normal. The candle was still on the counter, just burned out. Nothing was broken, nothing out of place. He told me it was probably just a draft, or the candle running low on wax. He spoke calmly, trying to reassure me, but I could tell he was also confused by how shaken I was. Eventually the power came back on. The lights flickered, then stayed on, filling the house with normal brightness. The shadows disappeared, and the house felt safe again, like it always did. My parents told me it was okay, that I had just scared myself, and that these things happen. But even after everything went back to normal, the fear stayed with me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the mirror, the sudden darkness, and that hissing sound. I kept thinking about how fast it happened, how there had been no delay at all. It wasn't like I had been staring at the candle for a long time or moving around. It was just thought, sound, darkness. As I grew older, I tried to explain it logically. Candles are fragile. A tiny movement of air can put them out. Our house was old, and drafts were common during blackouts when fans and heaters weren't running. The sound could have been the flame dying, the wick sizzling as it went out. All of that makes sense. But even now, years later, the memory still makes my stomach tighten. It wasn't just the candle going out. It was the timing, the feeling, the sudden, overwhelming sense that I had done something wrong, that I had crossed an invisible line without meaning to. As a kid, your imagination is powerful, and fear has a way of making moments feel bigger and more real than they might actually be. That experience stuck with me longer than I ever expected. I never tried anything like that again, not even as a joke. Mirrors at night still make me uncomfortable, especially in low light. And during blackouts, even now, I prefer using a flashlight instead of a candle. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe it was just a scared kid in a dark bathroom during a power outage. But to this day, I remember exactly how it felt when the flame went out and how the darkness seemed to swallow everything at once. It was a small moment, but it left a mark. My ex-wife and I once bought an older house built sometime in the 1930s. It had that heavy, lived-in feeling old houses tend to carry, like the walls had absorbed decades of voices and footsteps and never fully let them go. We bought it knowing it needed work. Renovation became our life for a while. Every evening after work, we'd change into old clothes and chip away at something new. It was exhausting, but there was a kind of pride in bringing a tired place back to life with our own hands. The basement was one of our bigger projects. It wasn't a finished basement, just a low-ceilinged concrete-floored space that smelled faintly of dust and old wood. The lighting was harsh and yellow, coming from a single bulb that hummed when it was on. We were installing new baseboards down there, measuring and cutting them upstairs, then carrying them down to paint and set aside to dry. The air was cool and still, and paint fumes hung low in the room. That night, we had finished painting a long stretch of baseboards and lined them carefully along the wall. We were proud of how clean they looked. The white paint was smooth and bright against the dull basement concrete. We double-checked that nothing was touching them, made sure the windows were closed, and headed upstairs. It had been a long day, and we were too tired to do anything but shower and fall into bed. I remember locking the doors like I always did. Old houses creak and settle, and I was particular about security. We didn't have kids, no roommates, no pets, just the two of us in that house. The basement door was closed when we went to sleep, and the house was quiet except for the occasional pop of old pipes cooling in the walls. The next morning, we went downstairs with coffee in hand, ready to admire our work before installing the boards. The basement felt colder than usual. I noticed that right away. The air had that damp chill that crawls into your sleeves. The bulb flickered when I turned it on, and for a second the room strobed in dim flashes before settling into its steady hum. We walked over to the baseboards and both stopped at the same time. Two of them had been gouged, not scratched lightly, gouged. It looked like someone had taken a sharp knife and dragged it the entire length of the boards, nearly 8 feet each. The cut was deep and confident, a single unbroken line. It carved through the fresh paint, through the old paint underneath, through primer, all the way down to bare wood. The edges of the groove were ragged and splintered. For a moment I didn't understand what I was seeing. My brain tried to make it into a paint defect or a crack in the wood, but the line was too deliberate, too straight, too purposeful. It wasn't an accident. It was a mark made by pressure and intention. My ex-wife asked me if I'd done it as a joke. I asked her the same thing. The question hung in the air between us longer than it should have. Neither of us was smiling. There was no humor in it. We both knew instantly that neither of us had touched those boards after we left them. I walked the perimeter of the basement, checking the small windows, the door, the latch. Everything was exactly as we'd left it. No broken glass, no sign of forced entry. Dust on the floor lay undisturbed, except for our own footprints from the night before. If someone had come in, they had done it without leaving a trace. We crouched down to inspect the gouges more closely. Running my finger along the cut made my stomach tighten. It was deep enough to catch skin. I tried to imagine the force it would take to drag a blade that steadily for 8 feet without slipping. Whoever did it had leaned into it. There was anger in that line, or at least a strange determination. The basement felt smaller as we stood there. The hum of the light seemed louder. Every tiny creak from the house above sounded like a footstep. I remember becoming hyper-aware of the silence between us. We weren't talking anymore. We were just listening. We started going through possibilities out loud, almost desperately. Maybe a tool fell. But there was nothing above the boards that could have created a straight, horizontal gouge. Maybe the wood warped overnight. But wood doesn't carve itself in a perfect line through layers of paint. We even entertained the idea of an animal, though neither of us could explain how an animal would make a cut like that or get in and out without disturbing anything else. The longer we stood there, the more wrong it felt. It wasn't just the damage. It was the timing. The fact that it happened in the one room of the house that already felt separate from the rest, like a pocket where sound died too quickly. The basement had always been a little unsettling, but we'd laughed it off as old house atmosphere. That morning, neither of us felt like laughing. We ended up replacing the boards. We didn't keep the damaged ones. I carried them outside and set them by the trash, but even then I found myself staring at the gouges, tracing them with my eyes like they might spell something if I looked long enough. They didn't. They were just long, violent lines that had no explanation. For weeks afterward, every noise in the house seemed sharper. At night, I'd lie awake listening to the wind press against the siding, wondering if I'd hear the basement door open. We never found any evidence of a break-in. Nothing else in the house was touched, no tools moved, no valuables missing, just those two boards carved cleanly and deliberately. We eventually finished the renovations and lived there for a while longer. Life settled back into routine, but that moment never fully left us. Sometimes we'd bring it up late at night, trying again to solve it. Each theory would fall apart under its own weight. We'd end up in the same quiet place, staring at the ceiling, remembering the shock of seeing those cuts. I've worked on a lot of houses since then. I've seen strange damage, weird settling patterns, all kinds of things that look mysterious until you understand the mechanics behind them. But I've never seen anything like those gouges before or since. Two perfect, deliberate lines that appeared overnight in a locked house with only two people inside. Even now, when I think back on that basement, I don't picture the finished renovation. I picture the boards lined up neatly, bright white in the humming light, and those deep cuts running through them like someone wanted to make absolutely sure we'd notice. And the worst part wasn't the damage itself. It was the feeling that came with it. The quiet certainty that something had happened in that room while we slept, and we would never know what. I am sorry for the interruption. I hate breaking the flow, but I am curious. Do you believe there is some truth to every story like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more, please subscribe. Okay, let's get back to it. I was living alone in the house at the time. My family had already moved into another place, and we were in the middle of trying to sell the old house, so most days and nights it was just me there by myself. At first, I actually liked the quiet. After growing up with noise, conversations, and people constantly coming and going, having the whole house to myself felt peaceful. I could move at my own pace, sit in silence, and finally breathe. That feeling didn't last long. From the very beginning, the house felt different when I was alone. It wasn't just empty, it felt watched. I would catch myself pausing in the hallway for no reason, or feeling uncomfortable in rooms I had grown up in and knew well. At night, the silence felt heavier than it should have. Sounds carried farther, and the house seemed to settle in ways that made my skin crawl. At first I brushed it off. Old houses make noise. When you're alone, your brain fills in the gaps. That's what I told myself. I didn't want to sound dramatic or paranoid, even to myself. I kept living my routine, telling myself everything was normal. Then my friends started noticing things too. A couple of close friends would come over sometimes, usually to keep me company or help me feel less alone in the house. One night, while we were sitting in the living room talking, one of them suddenly jumped up and asked if I had a cat. I said no. They showed me their arm. There were red scratch marks on their skin, thin and angry looking, like someone had dragged fingernails across them. Another friend had a similar experience on a different night. They were standing near the staircase when they suddenly yelped and stumbled back. Again, those scratches, not deep enough to need medical attention, but deep enough to leave marks and shock them. They were shaken, and honestly, so was I. I hadn't told them much about how the house made me feel, but now it was clear I wasn't imagining everything. That's when I stopped pretending this was nothing. The atmosphere in the house grew worse after that. I started feeling watched constantly, not just watched but judged. There was a presence that felt angry and restless. It didn't feel curious or neutral. It felt mean, the kind of energy that makes your chest feel tight and your thoughts race for no clear reason. I would hear movement in rooms I wasn't in. Soft footsteps, light taps, the sound of something shifting where nothing should be moving. At night, sleep became difficult. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe and creak around me. Sometimes I would feel like someone was standing just outside my door, close enough that if I opened it, I wouldn't be alone anymore. That was the point where I knew something had to change. I've always believed that if something is allowed to stay, it will. Silence and fear give things permission. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, there are moments where doing nothing feels worse than doing something. This was one of those times. Whatever was in the house was hurting people, even if only a little, and I couldn't allow that to continue. I didn't do anything dramatic at first. I started speaking out loud when I felt scared, reminding myself that this was my space now, that I belonged here. That helped a little, but not enough. The presence didn't leave. If anything, it felt like it was listening. The night I decided to banish it, I was completely alone. It was late, and the house felt heavier than usual. The air felt thick, like before a storm. I remember standing in the living room, heart pounding, trying to calm myself. I didn't have a script or a ritual planned. I just knew I had reached my limit. Whatever this thing was, it had crossed a line. I spoke out loud, firmly, telling it that it was not welcome anymore. I told it that it had hurt people and that it had to leave. My voice shook at first, but I kept going. I reminded myself that fear was exactly what it fed on. I wasn't going to give it that anymore. That's when it appeared. It was sudden and terrifying. One moment, the room was empty. The next, it felt like something was right in front of my face. I can't fully describe how it appeared, or only that it felt too close, like it had stepped into my personal space on purpose. My breath caught in my throat, and my vision blurred with panic. Then I saw the window. Pressed against the glass was a small child's hand. It didn't look blurry or faded. It was clear, solid, small fingers, pale skin, and then I saw his face. A little boy. He couldn't have been more than a few years old. His features were sharp and unmistakable. Blue eyes that seemed far too aware, brown hair framing his face, and lips that were a deep, unsettling red. I don't have any human children. There was no logical explanation for this. My brain screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. Fear rooted me in place. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might pass out. I stared at him, frozen, trying to understand what I was seeing. He didn't look sad. He didn't look scared. He looked calm, almost curious, and that made it worse. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember speaking. I only remember bringing my hands up to my face and sinking down, rocking back and forth like a child myself. I kept telling myself over and over that it was okay, that I was okay, that this would pass. I don't know how long I sat there like that. Minutes? Longer? Time didn't feel real in that moment. Eventually the pressure lifted. The feeling of being watched faded. When I finally looked up, the window was empty. The room was just a room again. After that night, everything changed. The house felt quiet in a way it never had before. Not tense quiet, peaceful quiet. The heavy feeling was gone. I could move through the rooms without my chest tightening. I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. When friends came over again, nothing happened. No scratches, no strange sensations, no fear. Whatever had been there was gone. I won't pretend I didn't feel conflicted afterward. That image of the little boy stayed with me for a long time. His face was so clear, so detailed, that it felt impossible to dismiss it as imagination. I thought about him often, wondering what he was or who he had been. I even felt a strange sense of guilt, like I had done something cruel instead of necessary. But then I remembered the scratches. I remembered the fear. I remembered how unsafe the house had felt. Whatever that presence was, it wasn't harmless. It wasn't just passing through. It had made its choice. I don't hate it. I don't feel proud either. I did what I had to do. Since that night, nothing like that has happened again. No shadows, no strange sounds, no fear clinging to the walls. The house became just a house again, a place of memories instead of nightmares. When it was finally sold, I felt a strange relief, like closing a chapter that needed to end. Sometimes I think about that night and wonder if things could have been different, if the presence could have stayed without harming anyone. But then I remind myself that kindness doesn't include fear, and sharing space doesn't mean allowing pain. So wherever you are now, Lucas, I hope you found peace. But you couldn't stay. You can't be mean to people. I live alone, just me and my cats. Most days I'm fine with that. I like the quiet, the routine, the sense of control over my space. But that night was different. It was one of those days where everything had slowly piled up without me realizing it. Small stresses, old thoughts, worries I thought I had under control. By the time night came, it all felt too heavy. The anxiety didn't hit all at once. It crept in. At first it was just restlessness. I couldn't sit still. I paced around my apartment, checking my phone even though I knew there were no messages, no missed calls, nothing new. My chest felt tight, like my breath couldn't quite reach all the way down. My cats followed me around, confused, brushing against my legs, meowing softly. Normally that would calm me, but this time it barely registered. Then the self-directed anger started. That familiar, ugly voice in my head began tearing into me, telling me I was weak, that I should be able to handle this, that other people had real problems, and I was failing at something as simple as existing peacefully in my own home. The more I tried to argue with it, the louder it got. I sat down, then stood up again. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My thoughts were racing, looping over the same fears and regrets, refusing to slow down. I felt trapped inside my own body, like I couldn't escape myself. At some point, the anxiety shifted into something sharper, frustration, anger, not at anyone else, just at me. I remember thinking that I needed it to stop, and I didn't know how. I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking safely. I was overwhelmed and exhausted and desperate for relief. I raised my fist. It wasn't dramatic or planned. It was impulsive, born out of that intense moment where logic disappears. I was going to hit myself in the head, not because I wanted to hurt myself in some meaningful way, but because my brain was screaming and I wanted it to shut up. I wanted the noise to stop, even for a second. Before my fist could come down, something happened that I still can't fully explain. Someone grabbed my wrist. It wasn't gentle, but it wasn't violent either. It was firm, steady, unmistakable. My arm stopped mid-air, completely immobilized. My entire body froze. Time seemed to stretch out in that moment, like everything slowed down just enough for me to fully register what was happening. There was no one there. I live alone. The doors were locked. My cats were across the room, staring at me, wide-eyed and alert, but not panicked. There was no physical explanation for what I felt. And yet, the sensation was real as anything I've ever experienced. Fear hit me first, a sharp, electric fear that shot through my spine. My heart jumped into my throat. My breath caught. Every rational part of my brain tried to make sense of it and failed. For a split second, I thought I might be losing my mind. But then, something unexpected happened. The anxiety began to fade. Not instantly, but noticeably. The crushing weight on my chest loosened. The frantic buzzing in my head quieted. My breathing slowed, deepened. My muscles relaxed, even though my wrist was still being held. The anger I had been directing at myself drained away, replaced by something else entirely, comfort. It didn't make sense, and yet it felt undeniable. In that moment, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel attacked. I felt cared for. As strange as that sounds, that was the clearest emotion there. It felt like a boundary had been drawn for me when I couldn't draw one for myself. Like something or someone had stepped in and said, "No, not this, not now." The grip on my wrist released. I lowered my arm slowly, like I was afraid that if I moved too fast, the moment would shatter. I stood there for a long time afterward, just breathing, listening to the quiet of my apartment. My cats eventually approached me again, rubbing against my legs, purring like nothing unusual had happened. The world felt normal again, but I didn't. I sat down on the floor and cried. Not the panicked crying from earlier, but something deeper, a release. My body felt tired in a way that was almost peaceful. My thoughts were still heavy, but they weren't racing anymore. I kept replaying the moment in my head over and over, trying to understand it. I still don't know exactly what it was. I don't know if it was something psychological, some intense physical manifestation of my mind protecting itself. I don't know if it was stress, dissociation, or something my brain created to stop me from hurting myself. I don't know if it was something spiritual, something metaphysical, or something I'll never have words for. What I do know is how it felt. It felt like intervention. It felt like care. It felt like I mattered, even when I didn't believe that myself. That experience stayed with me, not in a haunting way, but in a grounding one. It forced me to confront how bad my anxiety had gotten. I couldn't brush it off anymore, or tell myself it wasn't serious. Something inside me, whether conscious or not, had hit a breaking point. Shortly after that, I went into therapy. That decision didn't come from fear of the experience, but from respect for it. I realized that whatever had happened, it was a signal, a clear one. I needed help, real help, not just coping on my own, not just pushing through and pretending I was fine. Therapy wasn't a magical fix. It took time. It took honesty. It took sitting with uncomfortable emotions and learning how to recognize them before they spiraled out of control. I learned about my anxiety, how it shows up in my body, how it feeds on self-criticism and silence. I learned healthier ways to interrupt those moments before they turned into something dangerous. I've never experienced anything like that night again. No hands grabbing my wrist, no unexplained physical sensations, nothing supernatural or unexplainable since. And honestly, I don't feel like I need to. That one moment was enough. It did what it needed to do. Now, when my anxiety starts to rise, I think back to that night, not with fear, but with awareness. I remind myself that there is a line I don't cross, that hurting myself isn't an option, that even when I feel alone, I am not beyond care, not beyond intervention, not beyond help. Whether that moment came from my own mind protecting me or something else entirely, it saved me from myself in that moment, and it pushed me toward a path where I learned how to protect myself going forward. I still live alone. I still have my cats. I still have anxious days, but I also have tools now, support, perspective, and a deep respect for the fact that my pain mattered enough to be stopped, even when I couldn't see that myself. I don't try to explain the experience anymore. I don't need to label it or prove it. I just carry it with me as a turning point, a reminder that sometimes the moment that scares you the most is the one that keeps you alive and sends you in the right direction. My older brother was stillborn 3 years before I was born. That fact was always part of our family history, even if it wasn't talked about all the time. It existed quietly in the background, like something everyone knew but didn't always have the words for. Growing up, I didn't fully understand what it meant at first. I just knew that there had been another child before me, someone who never got to grow up with us, someone who was missing, but somehow still present in ways that were hard to explain. From time to time, while my brothers and I were growing up, my mother would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of a baby crying. This didn't happen just once or twice, and it didn't stop when we were infants. It happened even as we got older, long past the age when any of us should have been crying like that in the night. The sound wasn't vague or imagined. To her it was clear and real, the unmistakable cry of a baby who needed comfort. Every time it happened, my mother would get out of bed and go to check on us. She never wanted to believe anything strange was happening. She was a practical person, the kind who always looked for normal explanations first. Maybe one of us was sick. Maybe someone was having a bad dream. Maybe the house was making noises that her half-asleep mind was turning into something else. So she would walk down the hallway toward our rooms, listening closely, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. That was when something else would happen. As she walked through the dark hallway, she would suddenly sense movement. It felt like a child running straight toward her out of the darkness. She described it as instinctual, like the way your body reacts before your mind has time to think. Without even questioning it, she would throw her arms out, ready to catch a child by the shoulders, expecting the solid, familiar weight of one of us crashing into her. But there was never anything there. Her arms would close around empty air. At first, when we were small, she thought maybe she was just tired. Maybe she was half dreaming, her brain filling in gaps that weren't really there. But as time passed, the experience changed in a way that made it harder to ignore. As I grew older, she said the place where she expected to feel the shoulders got higher. It was as if the child she thought was running toward her was growing along with me. What once felt like the height of a toddler slowly became the height of an older child. That detail bothered her more than anything else, because it didn't make sense if it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. She never told us these things right away. When you're a parent, you don't want to scare your kids with stories about crying babies and invisible figures in the dark. So she kept it mostly to herself, mentioning it only in passing years later or when something else happened that made it feel impossible to stay quiet about it. One night, when I was still young, my dad and my brothers were sitting together watching a movie. It was a normal evening, the kind you forget about almost immediately. Nothing felt strange at first. Then, suddenly, the sound started again. This time, it wasn't just my mother who heard it. The crying was coming from the attic. It wasn't faint. It wasn't something you could easily brush off as the house settling or the wind. It sounded like a baby crying loudly enough to carry through the ceiling. The mood in the room changed instantly. Everyone went quiet, listening, trying to figure out what they were hearing. Before anyone could even say anything, our dog completely lost it. Our dog started running in tight circles in the dining room, over and over again. His movement was frantic, almost desperate. What made it even more unsettling was that, as he ran, he kept his head tilted upward, staring straight at the ceiling. He was barking non-stop, sharp and panicked, like he was reacting to something directly above him. He wasn't just barking into the air. It looked like he was tracking something, following it with his eyes as he moved. And animals have a way of making things feel more real. You can tell yourself you're imagining something, but when a dog reacts like that, it hits differently. Dogs don't understand family history. They don't know about stillborn children or grief or memory. They just react to what they sense. Watching him run and bark like that made the entire situation feel heavier, harder to explain away. No one went into the attic that night. I don't think anyone even suggested it. Sometimes fear doesn't show up as screaming or panic. Sometimes it shows up as silence, as everyone agreeing without saying it out loud that some doors are better left closed. As I got older and more independent, the strange experiences didn't completely stop. They just changed shape. Once I got my first car, I started noticing things that I couldn't easily ignore. On a few occasions, even when I had someone sitting in the passenger seat next to me, I would get the overwhelming feeling that someone else was in the car. It wasn't just a vague sense of being watched. It felt specific, like there was someone sitting in the back seat, right behind me. The first time it happened, I told myself it was nothing. Driving can mess with your head sometimes, especially at night. Shadows move. Lights reflect in mirrors. Your brain fills in shapes where there aren't any. But then it happened again and again. Each time, the feeling was the same, strong enough that I couldn't ignore it. I would glance up into the rearview mirror, my heart pounding, and for just a second, I would see someone back there. It wasn't clear enough to study in detail, but it was clear enough to scare me. The worst part was that the person looked a lot like me, the same general features, the same shape of a face. It was like looking at a version of myself that didn't quite belong there. Every time I looked directly, it would be gone. The back seat would be empty, exactly the way it should be. Whoever was in the passenger seat never seemed to notice anything strange, which somehow made it worse. I stopped mentioning it after a while because I didn't want to sound crazy. Instead, I just learned to live with the uneasy feeling and hope it wouldn't happen again. The last major experience happened years later, after my grandfather died. At that point, I was living in an apartment and recovering from a broken leg. I was stuck at home most of the time, restless and uncomfortable, trying to distract myself with television. My grandfather had always been a huge Detroit Tigers fan. Baseball was something he loved deeply, something that brought him real joy. Even if you didn't care about the sport, you knew how much it meant to him. One night, I was watching something completely unrelated on TV. I don't even remember what it was, just that it wasn't baseball. At some point, the channel changed on its own. The screen switched over to a Tigers game. I stared at it for a second, confused but not immediately scared. Technology glitches sometimes. Remotes malfunction. I picked up the remote and switched it back to what I had been watching. A little while later, it happened again. The TV switched itself back to the Tigers game. By the third time, I started to feel uneasy. It wasn't just the channel changing. It was the timing, the repetition, the specific choice of what it changed to. I was already emotionally vulnerable, dealing with pain, isolation, and the recent loss of my grandfather. The room felt heavier, quieter, like I wasn't alone anymore. Freaked out, I changed the channel again and turned the TV off completely. I wanted to be done with it. I wanted silence. I wanted control over my own space. A moment later, without me touching anything, the TV turned itself back on. And once again, it switched to the baseball game. That was the moment I couldn't explain away. It didn't feel threatening. It didn't feel angry or dark. It felt familiar, almost gentle, like someone was trying to say hello in the only way they could think of. I don't know what any of it means. I don't know if the crying baby, the feeling in the hallway, the figure in the mirror, or the TV turning itself on are connected. I don't know if they're separate things or parts of the same story. I don't know if it's grief, memory, coincidence, or something else entirely. All I know is that these moments have stayed with me. They didn't feel random. They felt personal, like reminders that some bonds don't end the way we expect them to, and that sometimes the past has a way of quietly making itself known, whether we're ready for it or not. I came home from class around 11:30 that morning, and the house was completely empty. It was one of those quiet afternoons where the silence almost feels thick. No TV, no voices, no footsteps upstairs. Just the hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing outside. I tossed my bag down, grabbed a snack, and drifted around the house for a while doing nothing important. The light coming through the windows had that lazy afternoon glow, and it made me feel heavier with every minute. By about 2:30, I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. The kind of tired that hits all at once like someone flipped a switch. I told myself I'd just take a quick nap, nothing serious. I set a 20-minute timer on my phone, crawled into bed still wearing my clothes, and pulled the blanket halfway over me. I remember thinking I wouldn't even fall asleep that fast. I always tell myself that. I was wrong. I dropped into sleep almost immediately. What woke me felt incredibly real. My bedroom door opened. Not a dream version of the sound, by the exact creak it always makes when someone pushes it too quickly. My heart jumped in my chest because I thought someone had come home and I hadn't heard them. For a split second I had that confused panic you get when you wake up suddenly and don't know what time it is or who's in your room. Then I felt the mattress dip and my dog jumped onto the bed. He circled once, like he always does, and flopped down next to my legs. I remember the warmth of him and the weight pressing into the blanket. That grounded me instantly. I relaxed, half awake, and thought, okay, someone must have let him in. I didn't even open my eyes fully. I just accepted it and drifted right back to sleep. The second time I woke up was violent. There's no other word for it. I didn't ease out of sleep. I snapped awake like I'd been shaken. Every nerve in my body fired at once. I had the absolute certainty that someone was standing next to my bed. Not a vague feeling, a presence. Close enough that if I reached my hand out, I would touch them. I was facing the wall, so whoever it was would have been right behind me. My first thought was my mum. The panic shifted into embarrassment. I pictured her standing there with her arms crossed, about to lecture me for sleeping in the middle of the day. That was such a normal explanation that it overrode the fear. I spun around in one quick motion, ready to explain myself. There was no one there. The space beside my bed was empty, or the door was closed. The air felt still. My dog was still curled up, breathing slowly, completely calm. If someone had just been standing there, he should have reacted. He didn't even lift his head. I sat there, heart racing, staring at the spot where I had been so sure someone stood. It wasn't like a shadow or a trick of the light. It was the feeling of a person occupying that space. I could almost map out their height in my mind. My skin prickled, the way it does when you think someone is watching you. I grabbed my phone and checked the timer. 8 minutes left. I told myself it was just that weird, half-dream state you get stuck in sometimes. Sleep paralysis, or a false awakening, or whatever name science gives it. I tried to laugh it off. The house was quiet. No doors opening, no footsteps, no voices, just the same silence as before. I rolled back over and forced my eyes closed. The next time I woke up, my phone was ringing in my hand. The alarm hadn't gone off yet. It was my mom calling. I answered, still foggy, my voice thick with sleep. She sounded strange right away, tight, like she was holding something in. She told me my great-aunt had died. My aunt had been in the hospital for about a week after what the doctors described as a stroke-like event. Everyone knew it was serious, but there was still this fragile hope that she might pull through. My mom said she passed around 1 in the afternoon. I did the math without meaning to. 1 o'clock was right in the middle of my nap. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. The room looked the same as it always did, sunlight through the curtains, and my dog stretching and yawning. But something felt tilted, like the air pressure had changed. I asked my mum what happened, and she repeated the details, her voice shaky. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. She told me she already knew my aunt was going to die that day. My mum is Scottish and grew up with a lot of old beliefs and superstitions. She believes in signs, omens, things that exist in the corners of stories. I've always been the opposite. I'm the one who looks for the logical explanation, the psychological angle, the coincidence. So when she said she knew, I thought she meant she had a bad feeling, or that the doctors had warned her. That's not what she meant. She said that when she woke up that morning to take my brother to school, she came into my room to check if I was still asleep. And she told me she saw a wraith standing next to my bed. She said it calmly, like she was describing the weather, like it was a fact she'd already accepted. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My mind stalled out trying to process what she was saying. A wraith in her culture is a kind of ghostly figure that appears as a warning of death. She said it was standing right beside me, watching. She didn't wake me. She just backed out of the room and left. I asked her what time that was. She said it was a little after 6 in the morning. That detail shouldn't have mattered. It should have made the whole thing easier to dismiss. But instead it made my thoughts spiral faster, because when I woke during my nap, I didn't feel like someone was entering the room. I felt like someone was already there, standing in the exact same place she described. I told her about the nap, about the door opening, about the certainty that someone was beside my bed. There was a long silence on the line while I talked. When I finished, she didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't sound triumphant or scared. She sounded sad, like something old and heavy had settled onto her shoulders. After we hung up, I sat on my bed staring at the wall. My dog climbed into my lap, completely unaware of the storm in my head. I tried to line everything up neatly. Sleep hallucination, coincidence, suggestion. My brain reaching for patterns because that's what brains do. I repeated those words to myself like a mantra, but the feeling of that presence wouldn't fade. It wasn't the image of a ghost that bothered me. I never saw anything. It was the memory of certainty. That instant, animal knowledge that someone was there. You can't argue with a feeling like that using logic, because the feeling happened before logic got a chance to speak. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Family phone calls, quiet voices, arrangements. I moved through it all automatically. Every now and then my mind would drift back to my bedroom, and I'd feel that same cold spike in my chest. That night I didn't want to sleep. I lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the dark shape of my door. The house made its normal noises, pipes ticking, the heater kicking on, but every sound felt loaded. I kept replaying my mom's words. Standing next to your bed, watching you. A warning. I still don't know what I believe. I don't think I saw a ghost. I don't think a spirit came to visit me. But I can't shake the timing, or the way my body reacted before I knew anything had happened. There's a part of me that wonders if grief and fear and human connection run deeper than we understand. If sometimes our minds pick up on things we don't have language for yet. Or maybe it was just a dream layered perfectly on top of a tragic coincidence. Either explanation should comfort me. Neither one fully does. What stays with me isn't the idea of death or omens. It's that moment of waking and knowing I wasn't alone. The air felt occupied, charged, as if the room itself was holding its breath. I've taken naps since then. I've woken up in the middle of the day and laughed at how dramatic the whole memory sounds when I retell it. Life kept moving. Classes, work, errands, normal things. But every once in a while, I'll wake suddenly and my heart will hammer for a split second before I realize the room is empty. And in that split second, I remember exactly how it felt. Not like I saw something, like something saw me. When I was 10 years old, my family moved into a house that was already ancient by local standards. The realtor told my parents it was a little over 200 years old. At the time, that number didn't mean much to me. I didn't have a sense for how long 200 years really was. I just knew the house was huge, crooked in places, and had the kind of smell that old buildings have, a mix of dust, wood, and something sweet and stale that never quite went away no matter how much you cleaned. The day we moved in is burned into my memory because of my uncle. He had agreed to help us with the heavier furniture. He was already known in the family as an odd guy, quiet, nervous energy, the type who laughed at the wrong moments and then went silent for long stretches. Still, he showed up that morning with a truck and gloves ready to help, and everything was normal while we were unloading outside. He joked with my dad, teased me about being too small to carry anything important, the usual stuff. Then we opened the front door. He stepped inside first, carrying a lamp. I was right behind him. I remember the air inside being cooler than outside, even though it was summer. He stopped just inside the doorway, not dramatically, just stopped. His shoulders stiffened. The lamp shook slightly in his hands. I thought he was about to say something funny, but he didn't. He slowly set the lamp down on the floor without looking at anyone. My dad asked what was wrong. My uncle didn't answer right away. He looked down the hallway toward the back of the house, like he was trying to focus on something far away. His face drained of color. He muttered, "I can't do this," under his breath, and turned around and walked straight back outside. We all assumed he was joking at first. He wasn't. He got in his truck and left. No explanation, no goodbye. My dad tried calling him later, and he wouldn't answer. For weeks after that, he avoided us. He skipped birthdays, skipped holidays. If the house came up in conversation, he'd change the subject or suddenly have somewhere else to be. It became this weird family mystery that everyone half laughed about and half avoided talking about too seriously. Because families are strange and humor is how people deal with discomfort, we turned it into a joke. Someone said he must have seen a ghost, and that stuck. For no reason anyone can remember, we started calling the imaginary ghost Billy. It was just a random name that got thrown out during dinner one night, and everyone repeated it until it became part of the house. If something went missing, someone would shrug and say, "Billy took it." If a door creaked open on its own, my dad would grin and say, "Evening, Billy." It was silly, a running gag. The house felt less intimidating if we pretended we already knew its ghost and he was just another resident. Then my little sister started talking. She was a toddler when we moved in, barely forming sentences. At first it was normal kid stuff, imaginary friends, nonsense words, babbling stories that only made sense to her. We didn't think much of it. Kids are weird, that's just part of being a kid. But she kept saying one thing that didn't fit. At night she would ask us to shut her bedroom door all the way, not cracked, or not halfway, completely shut. When my mom asked why, she said very calmly, "So I don't have to see the boy." We assumed she meant a dream. My mom told her there was no boy. My sister shook her head and pointed toward the hallway. "The boy walking," she said. "He walks there." She wasn't scared when she said it. That's what made it unsettling. She said it like she was talking about the mailman. Just a simple fact about the world. There is a boy. He walks in the hallway. Please shut the door so I don't have to see him. We laughed it off in front of her. Later, when she was asleep, my parents admitted it creeped them out a little. But we were already deep into the Billy joke by then. So the story just folded into it. "Guess Billy's making friends," my dad said. Everyone laughed, but the laughter felt thinner than before. For years, the joke stayed alive. Things would go missing. We'd blame Billy. Strange noises in the night. Billy again. My sister occasionally mentioned the boy, always casually, always like he was just part of the house's normal routine. Eventually, she stopped talking about him. Kids grow out of things. We assumed that was the end of it. Then we renovated. The house had layers of history buried inside it. Old wallpaper under newer wallpaper, hidden doors that had been sealed shut decades earlier, floors that had been covered and recovered so many times that walking across them felt like stepping through time. One summer, my parents decided to rip up the newer flooring in one of the main rooms to restore the original hardwood. When they pulled the boards up, we found newspapers packed underneath as insulation. Apparently, that was common a long time ago. Instead of modern materials, people stuffed whatever they had into the gaps. Newspapers, cloth, scraps. We sat on the floor, surrounded by brittle, yellowed pages that crumbled if you handled them too roughly. It felt like opening a time capsule. We started reading them for fun. The articles were fascinating. Ads for things that were cutting edge at the time. Early refrigerators, strange household inventions, social events from a town that barely resembled ours anymore. The language was formal and dramatic in a way modern writing isn't. Even the smallest stories felt important. Then we found the article. It was tucked between pages about local politics and farm equipment, a small column, easy to miss. My mom read it out loud at first in an amused tone. Then her voice changed. She slowed down, stopped smiling. The article described a boy named Billy. He lived in our house. It named the street. There was no mistake. It was our address, just written in the old style. The article explained that Billy was mentally disabled and lived with his family there. One afternoon, he had been playing outside near the property and died in an accident. The details weren't graphic, but they didn't need to be. The tone was sympathetic, almost gentle, describing him as a sweet child loved by his neighbors. The room went quiet. I remember looking at my sister. She was older by then, old enough to understand what we were reading. She didn't say anything. She just stared at the newspaper like it was staring back at her. For years, we had been joking about Billy the ghost. For years, my sister had been talking about a boy in the hallway, and buried under our floors was a newspaper article about a boy named Billy who died connected to our house. No one laughed this time. We didn't suddenly become ghost believers overnight. My parents are practical people. They looked for coincidences, for explanations. Billy was a common name back then. Kids imagine things. Old houses creak and whisper. You can stack enough rational arguments to build a wall around anything if you try hard enough, but the coincidence sat there like a stone in the middle of the room, heavy, impossible to ignore. Years later, my uncle finally talked about the day we moved in. It came up at a family gathering after a few drinks loosened everyone's nerves. Someone teased him about abandoning us, and instead of deflecting, he sighed and rubbed his face like he'd been carrying the story for a long time. He said when he pulled into the driveway, he felt sick, not nervous, not anxious, sick, like his body was warning him before his brain understood why. He told himself it was nothing and went inside anyway. The moment he crossed the doorway, the feeling doubled. He described it as stepping into a room where someone had just been screaming, not hearing a scream, feeling the echo of one. He said he knew with absolute certainty that he wasn't supposed to be there. That's why he left. He didn't see anything, no ghost, no shadow. Just that overwhelming certainty pressing down on him until walking out felt like the only sane option. He avoided the house afterward because even thinking about it made his chest tight. Or hearing him say it out loud brought everything back. The joke, the newspaper, my sister's calm little voice asking to shut her door. I grew up in that house. I saw plenty of things I can't easily explain. Shadows moving where nothing should move. Footsteps that didn't match anyone in the family. The feeling of being watched in empty rooms. But memory is tricky. Old houses get inside your head. Fear fills in gaps and paints over ordinary events until they look supernatural. I still don't call myself a believer. I don't claim the house was haunted. I don't tell the story as proof of ghosts. I tell it as a collection of facts and moments that lined up in a way that made the air feel thin and strange. The newspaper exists. The article exists. My uncle's reaction was real. My sister's words were real. Maybe it was all coincidence stacked on coincidence until it looked like something more. But even now, years later, when I think about that house, I picture a small boy walking quietly down a long hallway, repeating a path he took so often in life that he never stopped taking it. And I understand why my uncle turned around at the door. When I was a kid, weekends at my grandparents' house felt like stepping into a separate world. Their place had this attached mother-in-law apartment that smelled like old books, furniture polish and time. The adults always gathered in the main house, drinking coffee and talking for hours about things we didn't care about, so they'd send all of us kids into the apartment to keep ourselves busy. My sister, my cousins and I basically claimed it as our territory. It was our fort, our castle, our secret base. We knew every creak in the floor and every weird corner of that place. My grandparents were hoarders, though no one really used that word back then. To us it just meant there were endless things to look at. Stacks of boxes, old toys from decades before we were born, tools, clothes, dusty photo albums, the strange knickknacks we weren't supposed to touch, but always did anyway. The basement under the apartment was the real treasure cave. It was packed wall to wall with stuff. Some of it was junk, some of it was antique, and some of it was probably valuable, though we didn't understand that at the time. We just knew it felt mysterious. One afternoon we were bored and invented a game of hot and cold. Someone found a tiny brass key in a drawer and decided it would be the object we hid. It wasn't attached to anything, just a loose key with no label. That made it more interesting. We convinced ourselves it must unlock something important. Maybe a chest, maybe a hidden door. Kid logic. We took turns hiding it around the apartment. The rest of us would shout hot or cold while the seeker wandered around dramatically. We were loud and laughing, running in circles, knocking into furniture. During one round, whoever was hiding the key tried to tuck it near the basement door. It slipped out of their fingers and skittered across the floor. We all heard the little metallic clink as it slid perfectly under the crack of the basement door and disappeared. Everything went quiet. We stared at the door like it had swallowed the key on purpose. The basement wasn't exactly forbidden, but it wasn't a place we were encouraged to hang out. It was dark, cluttered, and full of things that could fall on you. We stood there arguing in whispers about who had to get it. No one volunteered. Finally, because I was closest, and maybe because I didn't want to look scared in front of everyone, I reached for the knob. The door opened with that slow, sticky creak old doors have. A draft of cold air rolled up the stairs. The basement light wasn't on. The only illumination came from the apartment behind me, stretching down the steps in a weak yellow stripe. And there was a man standing at the bottom of the stairs. I didn't recognize him. That's the first thing that hit me. He wasn't family. He wasn't a neighbor. He was just there. He was holding a pile of things in his arms, random objects pressed against his chest like he'd scooped them up in a hurry. I remember a small box, some fabric, maybe a tool. His clothes were dirty, not filthy, but worn in a way that made him look out of place in my grandparents' neat, dusty world. We locked eyes. His face changed instantly when he realized I could see him. His expression wasn't angry exactly, but it was sharp and urgent. He barked at me in a harsh whisper that cut through the air. "Go back upstairs, kid! Go!" I didn't think. I didn't scream. I didn't ask questions. My body reacted before my brain did. I slammed the door and ran. I ran so hard I tripped over my own feet and crashed into the main house, words tumbling out of my mouth in broken pieces about a man in the basement. The adults froze. Chairs scraped. My dad stood up immediately. He went down there with that calm, controlled anger parents get when they think someone might be messing with their kids. I remember standing in the kitchen, shaking while everyone waited. It felt like forever before he came back up. He said there was no one there, no sign of anyone, no open windows, no disturbed piles, just the same crowded basement it had always been. The adults exchanged looks. Someone laughed nervously and said, "I must have imagined it. Maybe I saw a shadow. Maybe I got scared by my own reflection." Kids have wild imaginations, but my sister and cousins backed me up. They hadn't seen the man, but they'd heard his voice. They saw my face when I ran in. They knew I wasn't pretending. Still, the official family version became that it was a misunderstanding, a trick of the light, a child's overactive mind. We kept going to that house for years after, but I never opened that basement door again. I wouldn't even stand near it. The apartment didn't feel like our secret fort anymore. It felt watched. The adults kept treating the story like a funny anecdote I'd eventually outgrow, but it never softened for me. The memory stayed sharp. I could still see the man's eyes, the way he clutched those objects, the urgency in his voice. He hadn't sounded like a ghost or a monster. He sounded like a real person who didn't want to be caught. About 5 years later, both of my grandparents passed away within months of each other. The house fell to my dad to sort out. Cleaning it was a massive job. Decades of accumulation had to be catalogued, donated, or thrown away. I helped because that's what you do for family, but stepping back into that basement as a teenager made my stomach twist. We started noticing gaps, empty spaces where there should have been things. Boxes that older relatives swore had once been full of valuables were light or completely gone. Jewelry my grandmother used to talk about. Tools my grandfather prized. Collectibles. It wasn't one or two missing items. It was a pattern. Someone had been taking things for a long time. No one ever proved anything. There were no records, no cameras, no witnesses, just absence. But as we stood there in that dim basement, holding half-empty containers and confused memories, I felt that childhood moment rush back in perfect clarity. The man at the bottom of the stairs, the pile of objects in his arms, his voice telling me to go upstairs. I realized with a cold certainty that I hadn't imagined anything. I had interrupted someone in the middle of stealing from my grandparents. Maybe he'd been doing it for years. Maybe he knew their habits, knew when the apartment would be full of distracted kids and chatting adults. He must have slipped out another way before my dad reached the basement. The house was old. There were doors and crawl spaces I didn't understand back then. The part that still unsettles me isn't just that he was there, it's how close it was. I was a child standing alone at the top of a dark staircase with a stranger who had broken into my grandparents' home. He could have run at me. He could have grabbed me. Instead, he told me to go, almost like he wanted me out of the way, not hurt. After we finished cleaning, I didn't return to that house again. Even when it was sold, even when new people moved in, I stayed away. Some places keep an imprint of what happened inside them. Every time I picture that basement door, I'm back in that moment with my hand on the knob, the cold air rising, and a man in the shadows staring up at me. Everyone eventually stopped talking about the story. It became one more strange family memory folded into the pile of others. But I know what I saw. My sister and cousins still insist it was real. And when I think about all the things that vanished from that basement over the years, I can't shake the feeling that I caught a thief mid-act. And for one frozen second, we both understood exactly what was happening. Then he sent me back upstairs and I listened. I remember that moment with an uncomfortable level of clarity, mostly because it was so ordinary at first and then so terrifying in the span of just a few seconds. Nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. It was one of those in-between moments in the day, the kind you don't think twice about. I was at home, minding my own business, sitting on the toilet, scrolling through Reddit, completely relaxed. I had plans to take my lawnmower back to the storage shed once I was done, and that was about as exciting as my day was supposed to get. The house was quiet in that comfortable, familiar way, the kind of quiet that tells you everything is normal. The dogs were outside, doing whatever dogs do, and I wasn't paying much attention to anything beyond my phone screen. I was half reading, half zoning out, not really present in my surroundings at all. My guard was completely down. There was no reason for it not to be. Then I heard the dogs start barking. At first it didn't alarm me. My dogs bark at everything. A squirrel, a passing car, a leaf moving the wrong way in the wind. Barking is just part of the background noise of my life. I barely registered it, assuming they were reacting to something harmless. I kept scrolling, not even lifting my head. But then the barking changed. It wasn't the casual, half-interested barking they usually do. It was louder, sharper, more urgent. The kind of barking that makes your stomach tighten just a little before your brain catches up. That was when I paused my scrolling and listened more closely. Something about it felt off, too focused, too intense. And then I heard footsteps. That was the moment everything shifted. The footsteps weren't loud, but they were unmistakable. They weren't coming from outside the yard or from the street. They were close, too close. My heart rate jumped instantly. I froze, sitting there, suddenly very aware of how vulnerable I was. I wasn't locked in a safe room. I wasn't holding anything. I was sitting on a toilet, pants down, completely exposed, with no easy way to defend myself if something went wrong. Before I could even fully process that fear, I heard a voice. It was a very high-pitched voice, speaking to my dogs, telling them to quiet down. That was when pure panic set in. My mind immediately went to the worst possible place. Someone was in my house. Someone I didn't know. Someone trying to calm my dogs down so they wouldn't alert me or scare them off. My brain didn't consider any other explanation. It didn't slow down to think logically. It jumped straight into survival mode. Every scary story I'd ever heard, every true crime podcast, every warning about break-ins and home invasions came flooding into my head all at once. My hands started shaking. My mouth went dry. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. I remember thinking very clearly that if this was it, if this was how I was going to die, it was happening in the worst possible way. I reached into my pocketbook and grabbed my knife. The fact that I even had it on me felt like dumb luck. I held onto it tightly, trying to steady my breathing. I finished what I was doing as fast as I could, my hands trembling, my entire body tense. The absurdity of the situation didn't escape me, even in that moment. I was terrified for my life, and yet my brain still managed to think, if I'm about to die, I'm at least going to wash my hands. So I did. I washed my hands as quietly as humanly possible. I turned the faucet on slowly, barely letting the water run, terrified that any sound would give away my position. Every small noise felt impossibly loud. The sound of water hitting the sink felt like it echoed through the entire house. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting the handle to turn at any second. My mind was racing. I was trying to come up with a plan, but every plan felt useless. Do I hide? Do I run? Do I confront whoever is in my house with a knife and hope for the best? I felt stupid, scared, and angry all at once. Angry that I was in this situation. Angry that I hadn't locked myself in. Angry that the last meaningful thing I might get to do before dying was taking a shit. Once my hands were washed, I took a deep breath and opened the bathroom door. I stepped out slowly, my body rigid, every muscle ready to react. The house felt different now. The air felt heavier. The silence felt wrong. I moved carefully, knife in hand, toward the back of the house where the sounds had come from. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard from outside. I approached the back door, expecting chaos. I expected to see someone standing there, or the door wide open, or something clearly wrong. Instead, I saw my dogs. They were just sitting there, calm, quiet, completely unbothered. That confused me almost as much as it scared me. Dogs don't calm down like that if there's a stranger. They don't just stop barking and sit peacefully unless they recognize whoever is there. My fear didn't disappear, but it shifted. My brain struggled to make sense of what I was seeing, and then someone stepped out of the laundry room. I nearly jumped out of my skin, standing there, completely casual, completely alive and normal, was my best friend. For a split second, my brain couldn't process it. My body was still in fight or flight mode, and I was gripping the knife like my life depended on it. Then, reality finally caught up with me, and everything crashed down at once. Fear turned into shock. Shock turned into disbelief. And disbelief turned into an overwhelming wave of relief, so strong it made my knees feel weak. He had come to bring me to a party I didn't even know we were going to. He hadn't texted, he hadn't called. He had just let himself in, talked to my dogs in a high-pitched voice like he always does, and waited for me to appear, completely unaware that he had just scared me half to death. I stood there, staring at him, knife in hand, probably looking absolutely unhinged. He looked at me, confused and then amused, and asked why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I don't even remember what I said at first. I think I just started laughing, not because it was funny, but because the adrenaline had nowhere else to go. I told him everything, how I was on the toilet, how I heard the dogs barking, the footsteps, the voice, how I thought someone had broken into my house and was trying to quiet the dogs before killing me, how I genuinely believed the last meaningful thing I would ever do was take a shit and wash my hands quietly. He laughed, hard. I did not. Eventually, once my heart rate returned to something resembling normal, I could see the humor in it, the timing, the absurdity, the fact that my brain went straight to the worst possible conclusion. But in that moment, it was pure terror. Real, intense, stomach-dropping fear. Even now, thinking back on it, I can still feel that panic. The vulnerability of realizing how unprepared you are in everyday moments, how quickly normal can turn into horrifying, how your brain fills in the gaps with the worst-case scenario when you don't have all the information. I also learned a lesson that day. Announce yourself, always, especially if you're walking into someone's house unannounced and talking to their dogs in the middle of the day, because there is nothing quite like believing you're about to die, only to find out it's just your best friend trying to take you to a party. And yeah, to this day, I still joke that if I ever go out unexpectedly, I hope it's not while I'm on the toilet, because I already lived through thinking that was my final moment, and once was more than enough. In college, I dated a girl who lived about 3 hours away from me. The distance was annoying, but we made it work in the way college couples do, trading weekends back and forth like clockwork. One weekend I'd drive to her campus, the next she'd come to mine. It became routine, long drives, cheap gas station snacks, falling asleep on each other in tiny dorm beds. It felt stable in a chaotic college kind of way. The weekend everything went wrong was supposed to be her turn to visit. The problem was I had an all-night study session scheduled for a brutal exam. She knew about it well in advance. We talked about it. I warned her I'd barely be around. She said it was fine. She just wanted to be there, even if it meant hanging out alone for a few hours. That didn't seem strange. We'd done that before. Long-distance couples get used to imperfect timing. She texted me when she arrived. I remember glancing at my phone in the middle of studying. A short message saying she was there. Another saying she was annoyed I wasn't home yet. I apologized, told her I'd be back as soon as I could, reminded her about the session. The tone shifted. Her replies got colder. She said she felt stupid for driving all that way just to sit alone in my apartment. Then came the last message I ever received from her. She said she was leaving and going back to her place. I assumed she was mad and needed space. I figured we'd talk it out the next day like adults who were still learning how to be adults. I sent a few apologetic texts over the next couple of hours. No response. I told myself she was driving and didn't want to text on the road. And the next morning I woke up expecting an angry message waiting for me. Nothing. I texted again, asked if she got home safe. Still nothing. By the end of the day I was worried but not panicked. People cool off in silence sometimes. I told myself she needed time. 3 days passed. I kept texting, trying to sound calm, asking if she was okay, saying I was worried. The messages suddenly stopped delivering. Instead of sent, I got an automated notice, number not found. I stared at the screen thinking it was a glitch. I tried again. Same result. I called. The number didn't exist. At first I thought she'd changed it out of spite. It hurt, but it was a logical explanation. I boxed up the things she'd left at my apartment, a sweater, a toothbrush, a couple books, and mailed them to her address with a short note apologizing and asking her to call me when she was ready. The package came back stamped. No forwarding address. That's when the fear really started. I checked her instant messenger account. We didn't use it to talk, but I knew her username. It had been active for years. It was gone. Not offline. Gone. Like the account never existed. I called her apartment landline. One of her roommates answered, except it wasn't her roommate. The person on the other end said the people who lived there had moved out, all of them. No contact information, no idea where they went. The apartment had already been rented to new tenants. I remember standing in my kitchen, holding the phone and feeling like the floor had tilted. People don't just vanish that cleanly. Even messy breakups leave traces. Angry messages, mutual friends picking sides, social media fallout. There's noise. There's evidence a life existed. This was silence. I started asking around. I had a couple friends who worked in school administration. I begged them to check enrollment records at her university just to confirm she was still a student. I wasn't trying to stalk her. I was trying to make sure she was alive. They came back with nothing. No student by her name. No record of her ever being enrolled. I thought they were joking. I pushed harder. Gave them every variation of her name I could think of. Still nothing. It was like I'd invented her. I checked her license plate number. I'd driven her car enough times to remember it. It wasn't registered to anyone. Not expired. Not reassigned. Just blank. I reached out to mutual friends. Every single one said the same thing. They hadn't seen her, hadn't heard from her, and assumed we'd broken up. When I explained the situation, the conversations turned awkward fast. People didn't know how to respond to a disappearance. It's not a normal breakup story. You can't nod sympathetically and say, that sucks. There's nowhere to put it. Finally, I called the police. I felt ridiculous doing it. I wasn't family. I knew that. But I explained everything anyway. The drive, the last text, the disconnected number, the vanished records. They checked for accidents along the route she would have taken. Nothing matching her car or her description. Nothing in the days after either. They told me they couldn't file a missing person report without a family member. I hung up feeling helpless in a way I'd never felt before. There was no system designed for my girlfriend disappeared and the world forgot she existed. There was no box to check on a form for that. After a while, life kept moving, because it always does. Classes continued. Exams came and went. Friends stopped asking about her because the story made them uncomfortable. I packed away the few photos we had together because looking at them made my chest tight. I half expected her to reappear one day with an explanation that made everything make sense. Witness protection, family emergency, a secret life she never told me about, but she never did. Years have passed and I still run through possibilities sometimes. Maybe she had a reason to erase herself. Maybe I never knew her as well as I thought. Maybe there's a perfectly mundane explanation buried in paperwork and human error and coincidence. Or maybe some stories don't resolve cleanly. What haunts me isn't anger. It's the absence of closure. There's no final conversation to replay, no last fight to analyze. Just that single message saying she was going home, followed by a silence so complete it swallowed her whole. I've dated other people since, built a life. On the surface, it's just an old college story now, something strange that happened when I was young. But every once in a while, I'll see someone in a crowd who looks like her from a distance, and my brain freezes for a second. I wonder what I'd say if it really were her, if she walked up and acted like nothing unusual happened. Mostly I just hope she's alive somewhere, happy, safe, existing in a version of the world where her records didn't vanish and her name still opens doors instead of returning errors. I don't need an explanation anymore. I just need to believe that disappearing didn't mean ending. Because loving someone who evaporated without a trace leaves a strange mark. It teaches you how fragile identity is, how easily a person can slip from the center of your life into a question no one can answer, and how sometimes the scariest stories aren't about ghosts or monsters. They're about the quiet space where a real person used to be and the echo they leave behind. The story ends here. If this one stayed with you, please leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe so you are here for the next one. Until then, stay safe.